there's no way scientifically to disprove God. There's a higher rate of spiritual but not religious young people. Christian belief has had an undeniable impact in the world. And I'm not a huge fan of guilting folks into praying a specific prayer to say, quick, become a Christian. I kind of use that as fire insurance. It doesn't have to affect the rest of my life. Jesus, he's too impressive to have us think that we can play him.
Hello everyone, welcome to our first podcast. My name is Fern Knepp and I am here with Pastor Luke Shinsky from the Kish Valley Grace Brethren Church.
Fern, thanks for having me. I'm super excited to do this, and thanks for all the work you're putting into making this possible.
Yeah, I want to thank you for thinking of me to help with it.
I feel like, I know we've chatted about this a lot, but it's been on our minds for quite a while to do something in the podcast realm, but especially because both of us are so fired up about connecting, especially with folks who are curious or have questions about Christianity, which is, I guess, related to the title that we picked, Awesome, Thoughtful Questions, and I'll tell just a brief story about that, I guess. So, for quite a while, I've kind of been involved with the young adult group through our church, and some particular individuals, including Fern here, but also her husband Brody, Mitchell Stauffer, Hayden, several others, are just, in my mind, really well known for being young people who are asking super interesting and curious and humble questions. And I think back on my time at that age, and I was like so afraid of asking honest and helpful questions that I didn't. And I just always want to encourage and brag about how cool it is. So we thought we'd start this podcast that's basically a space to kind of make more public those individual conversations about some of the questions that we think folks are asking. So.
Yes. Yep. And before we dive in, I think, we should briefly explain to our audience our goals and what we hope to achieve with this podcast.
Yeah. So a couple things in my mind. First is, I don't think this is directed kind of mainly to people who have been Christians for 20 years and that kind of thing. I'm mostly curious about folks that are maybe were raised in the church but left, or folks who kind of were raised without any religious background and are curious or wanting to learn, or even folks who are going through some difficult time and just have questions about kind of their worldview and what that's led to versus what does Christianity have to say to that kind of thing. And in my observation, there's a lot of young people asking a lot of really awesome questions along that. And then secondly, as I said, kind of this idea that we want these to be authentic and humble questions. I'd much rather have folks, contact us and give us questions. Fern is awesome about coming up with real good questions. And so in my mind, that's always such a great sign of humility. It doesn't take very much to think of yourself as the question responder and you're wise and have a bunch of answers, but it takes a lot more humility to ask, especially a significant or important or humble question. And then the third thing for me is I just am so more and more convinced over my life that the gospel, the Bible, and Jesus has a lot of real help to all of the real areas of our lives. So one of the ways that I talk about that is it's not like, you have all the aspects of your life and then in whatever the pie segment that is religion, that you can kind of stick Jesus in there. But instead, it's that a relationship with God and thinking of the world through the gospel and the biblical lens can actually significantly improve marriage. It can significantly improve work, your relationship to yourself, how you think about joy, what you think about the future, anxiety, like any area of life, money, you can you can name it. Whatever it is, the Bible generally has some clever, helpful, and really beautiful answers to those kinds of questions. So I just like to brag, not about me, but about how I think the biblical solutions to a lot of the complex problems in our world are fresh and helpful. Mm-hmm. So that's a couple of my thoughts.
Yeah, and I thought too about how podcasts are trending right now. So if we can hop on that trend and share the gospel and talk about Jesus, that's something a tool I think we should take advantage of. Mm-hmm. And it ties well into what I want to talk about today. So, and I know I've talked to you about this a little bit before, but for me personally, as I grow in my faith and develop a stronger relationship with God, I'm able to enjoy and experience all these great benefits that come with being a Christian. But at the same time, it almost breaks my heart whenever I see, my friends and loved ones who don't have that. There's like a certain peace and joy that I experience that I know only can come from God. And I want everyone to experience that. Mm-hmm. So I pray, often, almost daily, that God will use me in whatever way he can to spread his good news and, to help him open the eyes of others who, to see his truth. And that's how I know God's real, because he's given me countless opportunities to incorporate his word in my daily conversation. And so kind of my hopes for this podcast, and specifically this episode, is to direct people to a helpful resource when I find myself in these conversations. I just want to be able to say, hey, like, if you want to know or learn a little bit more, check out this podcast, and I can send them here. So this brings me to my question for you, Luke, which is kind of broad, but I just want you to make a case for Christ. Basically, the question is, if you had only 15 minutes to talk to a non-believer or someone who's on the fence of whether or not they believe in God, what would you want them to know in a nutshell?
It's a great question, Fern, and Lord help us all. Hopefully I can keep it somewhere around 15 minutes, because I really like talking about this. And it's such a broad thing, and so certainly I think the whole point of this podcast is we can spend more time going into a lot of different answers for that. So I'm going to hit on some things here, but please, if you're listening to this, know that this is not like exhaustive, or if I make a point, there's probably some other things kind of underneath or behind that I'm not saying for the sake of time. But as we said a couple times already, please reach out if you have authentic questions, if you have something you'd like to hear discussed, whether it be kind of tied to a question about the Bible or Jesus or what Christian faith looks like in our world or church or whatever. Have some thoughts about a lot of those things that I'm happy to share. And so feel free, what I'm basically saying is feel free to say more. But back to your actual question, what are the kinds of things that I would say to someone if I only had 15 minutes to talk about Jesus or faith or Christianity, that kind of thing? So I have four big points written down. We'll see if that can kind of guide me as I talk through them and help me keep a little bit more concise. The first one is I think a lot of folks believe that there's kind of two things. There's either, you kind of believe in this thing called religion or Christianity or faith, or you just simply, don't have belief. But I actually would strongly push back against that. I would say instead that everybody believes in something, or another way to say that is everybody has a story that they see their life living into. There's no such thing precisely as someone who doesn't make decisions or choices based on some set of moral decisions or some set of beliefs about what happens in the future. And so even if somebody is, simply an egotistical, greedy person, they're going to make decisions based on that belief, this step of faith, you could describe it as, that life ends when you die and that's it, so you might as well get the most and kind of make the most and honor yourself the most now, that kind of an idea. And so I think everybody, I just want to de-emphasize the difference, let's say, between like atheism and Christian belief or even another religious belief, and actually say that they're all in the same playing field. And the question is just what big story are you going to make your life a part of? And now I'm going to kind of go into more of the cases of why I think the Christian story is the best. But I just want to say that off the bat, because I think a lot of folks think Christianity is an option, and if not, the default is, you're not making decisions based on faith, where I think that's incorrect. So anyhow, that brings into my second point, which is I honestly think Christianity, the story of the Bible, is true. I think there are a lot of compelling answers, and I think there's more now than there have been relative to the questions about the truth claims of Christianity. And so for a long time, especially in my childhood, there was a lot of talk about kind of, what are you going to believe, Christian faith or science? That was a big push when I was younger. And the thought there was that science can kind of prove everything. And as long as we prove everything scientifically, that kind of removes God from, this realm of what we thought of as objective moral truth. And my sense, paying attention to the literature and research about some of this stuff, is that nowadays, most every scientist says they're more confused than ever about a lot of really, really significant things. And not only that, there's some really great philosophers that I won't take time to mention here, but that have done a lot of work on this. There's no way scientifically to disprove God. Science is the task of investigating what's going on Earth, and because that's what it's called to do, it's not able to investigate a metaphysical reality beyond what we can observe. And so, by definition, science is not made to make a determination, yes or no, about God. And I think younger people, my sense is, younger people are living in and feeling that reality more nowadays than when I was young, because they're open to spiritual belief. There's a higher rate of spiritual but not religious young people. And I think it's ironic they don't necessarily go back to Christianity, but they are pushing back against this kind of materialistic, atheistic worldview, something to that effect. Mm-hmm. I won't go into much more detail about it, but another piece of this is I think there's a lot of really compelling evidence for the resurrection of Jesus, which is the central kind of point upon which Christianity hinges. And so there's things such as women being the first witnesses, the reliability of the biblical accounts, all sorts of stuff, not to mention the fact that 3 billion people or so on earth are now followers of Jesus in 2,000 years since Christianity. And there's a guy named Tom Holland who spells this out really, really beautiful in a lot of his work, where he talks about so much of the foundations. A lot of folks, even let's say politically liberal folks nowadays, would make the claim that everyone should be treated equally, this kind of stuff. Holland makes the argument that all of that actually stemmed from the fundamental Christian assertion that all people are made in God's image and worth treating with dignity and respect. And so there's just a lot of data, information, arguments, and I'm not saying that it's a 100% closed door case, but I am saying that I think there's a lot of things to be made that Christianity is actually true. All right, so that's number 2 in a nutshell. Number 3 point that I would make is that Christian belief has had an undeniable impact in the world. And so I mentioned Tom Holland earlier. I mentioned the fact that 3 billion folks, Christianity is the most geographically diverse religion. We're kind of swimming in the byproducts of kind of Western influence of Christianity back from Europe and early America. Now we're standing on that, although a lot of people are denying the Christian Jesus part of it now. We're actually living in a world that has been created by that, and kind of not paying attention to the fact that the substructure of our society is built on those truths, and that a lot of us are living that anyhow. But also, it's not just the Christianity's impact globally or in America or whatever, but also the impact in my life. And so I've talked to a lot of people. My personal story, like everybody's personal story, has ups and downs. It has challenges. It has pains. And I can say with tremendous amounts of confidence that I have not arrived. I'm not, a perfect individual or anything like that. But the gospel's impact on my life in allowing me to forgive people and restore relationships, the gospel's impact on my life in calling me to live a life of meaning and purpose, to be a better husband, a significantly better parent, the gospel's impact of my life just in my own personal identity and not being a people pleaser that I've been historically, and other things like that. It's just another way to say this is, and I haven't personally, experienced, say, drug addiction or that kind of thing, but there's a lot of research nowadays that says the number one best predictor of someone kind of getting out of drug addiction and staying clean is a relationship with God. And so to me, it's like when you look at the worldwide, personal, individual impacts of Christianity, it's just there's a lot of pros that are worth talking about. And so that's 3. The 4th thing is basically I want to kind of narrow into Jesus. And so your question, Fern, was to make a case for Christ. And as I like to talk to people, I just get so... The more time I spend thinking about and reading about Jesus Christ, the more I am impressed with him. Mm-hmm. I feel like a lot of folks picture Jesus and they picture kind of some nice guy who's maybe a little bit of like kind of a religious prude, who's also, kind of a pushover because, they're going to put him on a cross and he kind of just does what people push him around to do. And I just think if people have that image of Jesus, they really haven't spent that much time processing kind of who Jesus is, not just in the Gospels as you read about him, but also as that relates to the rest of the biblical stories. But when I read and think about Jesus, I see someone who is unbelievably wise and insightful and told some of the shortest but most poignant and life-changing stories, that have changed the most lives for 2 centuries since. I read about a person who was the sinners, the tax collectors, the prostitutes were flocking to him and finding him so engaging that he actually put off a lot of the let's say hypocritical, prideful religious folks. I see somebody who is unbelievably courageous. I mean, in multiple instances where he could have been a people pleaser like I am and backed down, he stuck to his guns and said really true things that were hard for people to hear but meaningful. Oftentimes I have a painting that I'm looking at right now in my office of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, and I think about kind of the weight. We talk, a lot of people would talk nonchalantly about Christ going to the cross to die for everyone's sins, this kind of thing. But I just think a lot of people don't put a lot of mental reflection time into what that looked like and felt like and was. The Bible describes him sweating drops of blood, kind of not wanting to go to the cross, but saying to the Father that he was not going to be responsive to his feelings, but instead responsive to what God wanted him to do, and said, nevertheless, not my will, but your will be done. And he went to the cross to die, like to suffer for the good of others. I mean, the Bible says that a lot of, even a nice person might suffer a little bit for a friend, but to suffer for people who are at odds with God because of our sin nature, in order to bring us back into relationship with God. And so stories like the prodigal son, we can get into more of this stuff later, but stories about the kingdom, what Jesus talked about, the pictures the Bible give of just not heaven in the selfish sense of like, oh, I want to go to a place that's like an eternal vacation that feels good for me, because I don't really think that's precisely what God had in mind. I think what he had in mind was like just the healthiest picture of a community of people praising God and living as humans have always been intended for eternity, in joy, but also in mutual goodness and sacrificial love for each other. It's just become more and more and more compelling to me. And so when Jesus ascended at the end of the Gospel of Matthew, and this is kind of like a key piece of it to me, is he ascended and said that his disciples were to go into all the world and make disciples, or what I always use the word apprentices of his, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey all that I've commanded. And so I'm not a huge fan of kind of folks guilting folks into praying a specific prayer to say, hey, I want to, quick become a Christian. I kind of use that as fire insurance. It doesn't have to affect the rest of my life. I'm just kind of, I just don't think Jesus, he's too impressive to have us think that we can play him. Instead, I really do find it compelling to think that if Christ has done all that for us, that we ought to receive what he's done for us, kind of get saved by him, but then also become more like him and spread that message and share by becoming more like him, do the kinds of things that Christ did. Obviously we won't do them perfectly, but to the best of our ability to spread the glory and beauty of the gospel. It just seems like such a adventurous, selfless, healthy way to be in the world to me, and again, I'm not doing it perfectly, but I just, I get really excited about the idea of having more and more people becoming more like Christ and having that affect more and more people and just take people away from not just eternal hell, but also the hell that they're experiencing in their lives for various reasons now as well. So, all right, I have no idea how long that was, but that was my attempt. Fern, do you have any thoughts or comments on that so far?
You were talking about us, carrying, not just asking to be saved, but then also carrying those Christ-like characteristics throughout our entire lives from that point forward.
Sure.
Which makes me think of, 1 Corinthians 10:31, which says, "So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God," which is something that I've been working on in my life, just trying to incorporate Jesus in everything that I do, in a practical way, whether I'm just like at the gym and I pray between my sets or talking to people or trying to bless people, whatever the case may be.
The kingdom and heaven and earth, basically the end of the Bible is not people in a disembodied cloud heaven forever. The end of the Bible actually reunifies. The New Jerusalem comes down and is kind of a new heavens and a new earth, which ironically is exactly what the situation was in Genesis 1 and 2 early on in the Bible. And so the whole biblical story you could think of as something like people have separated out the with Godness of heaven and their life on earth. And eventually the mission of Christ is to bring those two things back together. And so when you read that verse and say, like, when you're at the gym, you're kind of with God and at the gym, like, to me, that's the goal of eternity, according to the Bible's story, is to unite. It's not to chuck earth away and do something else that's, the eternal vacation. It's instead to have real life, but all of it with God in the glory that exists. Like the Garden of Eden at the beginning.
Yeah, right. And like you said, I'm not perfect in any way. It's something that I've just been trying to incorporate in my daily life. I did want to just throw out this quote, and I hope I don't butcher this guy's name, but you might know who he is. I don't. But his name's Dietrich Bonhoeffer.
Bonhoeffer, yes.
Yeah.
I know him well. Yeah.
Yeah. I heard this quote by him, and it stuck out to me, and it says, "Your life as a Christian should make non-believers question their disbelief in God." A lot of what you said about incorporating God in all aspects of our lives, that's something that I felt tied in well, and could be helpful for maybe some listeners who are Christians and maybe in the same boat I am, who just want to share.
So Bonhoeffer's deal was, he was a German during the rise of Hitler. And he and some of his friends, not so many of the German pastors, Lutheran German pastors at that time, stood up and actually created a thing they called the Confessing Church, which went against Hitler at their day. And so when he writes a quote like that, he wasn't just pulling that out of thin air as if it'd be theoretically nice to stand up for your Christian faith. And so my opinion about that is, as things get increasingly, let's say, secularized in America, I think there's hope for the Christian church, because it's going to look like it'll be a little more challenging to say that you're a Christian if your actions and your life is not also backing that up. And what I mean by that is not just calling people out on unhealthy actions, but also living sacrificially and, adopting kids, which I talk about a lot, or, just doing the kinds of things that Christ has called us to. My expectation, my hope is that in the future in America, that's going to be more real, like it was for Bonhoeffer in Germany during the rise of Hitler here. So,
yeah. When we were talking about moral beliefs, I just want to ask, I feel like even before I was following Christ, I had a sense of some morals. Obviously we all can agree, whether you follow Christ or not, I think we all agree, murder is wrong.
Sure. And
even as far as saying, lying and cheating, those things are all wrong. How is this all wired into us because we're created by God, or is this, are our moral beliefs influenced by our upbringing, our surroundings, or,
That's great.
I don't...
Yeah, there's the kind of secular view of a lot of that nowadays is that your morals are kind of created by your culture around you. And this is kind of a whole, we get in the rabbit trail of postmodernism, is basically saying that whatever you kind of believe is true, and so we just have the sense of things, but there's no, let's say, objective moral truth that's like true for everybody. But what you're describing, which I'm right there with you, is that fundamentally I think we can all say that some things are objectively morally right or wrong. And the Bible, especially a great place to read about this would be in Romans, let's say 1-3. Romans 1 especially talks about how everyone is a sinner, based on this, what you're describing is this sense that we can look at the world and act in the world and realize some things are just right and some things are wrong. But it goes on in Romans 3 then to kind of describe how the Jewish folks especially would have known about right and wrong because they also got kind of what we would now consider the Old Testament scriptures, and the scriptures describe what's right and wrong as well. And so there's kind of like two things, and nobody's off the hook because there's a big picture view that just from living in the world we can kind of know and have some sense of right and wrong. But then if you kind of know and are aware of the scriptures, there's like a backing up or a written description of those right and wrong things as being unhealthy. And so the beginning of Romans is basically kind of like everyone does wrong things, and you especially Israelites should pay attention because you should have known better, and but you still also do wrong things, and this is why we need Christ. So
yeah, I mean, I would say once I accepted Christ and I can tell that the Holy Spirit's living within me, like there are things now that I notice that I wouldn't have noticed before. As far as like, instead of maybe like my first thought before would have been like, oh, how can I lie my way out of this, selfishly for my, but now I'm like, that's not an option. Like I couldn't live with myself doing that. That's how I know the Holy Spirit is working within me. If
you don't believe in any God, this is again getting down another rabbit trail for the 10th time here, but one of the things I pay a lot of attention to is people who are curious or interested or learning about God, this kind of thing, will often explore Christian faith and get so far. But one of the reasons people might not make the jump to actually believing that or living that themselves is because then it all of a sudden puts you outside of the role of you can get to decide what you feel like is right and wrong for you because of what you want to do. And so there's a lot of people who will bash Christians because they'll say, oh, Christians are hypocritical, da-da-da-da-da. And, they say they're going to do these kinds of things, but they don't. I don't want to be a Christian. Part of that, though, I think, is because people are nervous that they don't want to be, held to this kind of like significant standard that says, hey, healthy living is good, but it's going to require a lot less selfishness than what I have already. And so that's something that I pay attention to, Fern, about people who are exploring or curious about Christianity, is sometimes they front with a theological or academic argument, but ultimately, at the end of the day, part of what their frustration is, it can be related to church hurt or a history or complete misunderstanding of Christianity. That's very common. But it also can be something like, I just still want to be the boss of my own life. And, I get that. But if you're the boss of your own life, then the problem is you're not actually in control of all the people and everything around you like God is. So my opinion is it's still better to submit to God. But
it's like, we want to be in control of your life when things are going good, but when things are going bad,
that's exactly
it's
right.
like...
I wish I had an infinite resource to help me with this. That would be God, but I don't, you can't have it both ways. Like that was something else I struggled with before I really committed my life to Christ, was like I only wanted to believe in God when it was convenient for me. Whenever I found myself in a sticky situation, I'm like, okay, God help me. Right.
And I think that's where a lot of people do fall. So this is going back to the whole confusion with like people who just maybe don't know much about Christianity.
Sure.
I think that sometimes people look at religion as a whole and sometimes will tie things into Christianity that don't belong with Christianity, like weird, like ritual type things, or like just things that people are like, they find weird. I don't even know what denomination it is, but like some religions like pray to Mary or other gods or things like that. And I just like it's weird to me. And if I heard that and I was like, okay, I don't want to be a part of that. How do we single ourselves out? Like I don't know how to explain the question.
I think I have let me try this on and see if you think this is helpful or not to what you're asking about. One of the ways I think about Christianity or about religion as a whole is that there's two main ways you can go wrong. They fit in two categories. One category is kind of this category of, let's say, defiance against God that says kind of like, I'll be the boss of my own life, atheistic, there is no God, I'll just, we might not describe it this way. It's like, I'll be sacrificially loving when it's convenient for me or helpful for me, that kind of thing. It's still ultimately selfish, that kind of deal. But there's this other whole side that people can go wrong. And Tim Keller will talk about this as like kind of the morality or like the religious error where we actually think we'll earn our way into God's good graces.
Yes.
And so various, people who claim Christ can fall into this at various times. Other religions are mostly this, like Islam is mostly, I need to do enough good that Allah will like me. That's the basic premise of Islam. And so true Christianity, biblical gospel Christianity, is pushes back against both of those things equally. Because what it says is that Jesus came and died for you, not because of anything you've done to earn God's love. Or another way to say that same thing is that we love, this is how the Bible puts it, we love because God first loved us. That there's never anything we can do to achieve or earn or get that love. It's only a gift by God's grace.
Right.
And so, to me, if you rest on that, it does a couple of things. One thing it does is it gets rid of and pushes back against this kind of like hypocritical pridefulness that says, I'm better than you because, look, I read my Bible and you don't know the Bible, and look, I lived, I'm still married and you got a divorce, or look, whatever, because all those things are acting as if God likes us because of the good things we've done, which is incorrect.
Right.
But it also pushes back against this kind of like atheistic worldview, because instead it sees God as the beautiful giver of good gifts, that are unearned, unmerited by our works, that, we have rebelled against God, and he still pursued us to bring us back because of what Christ did for us into right relationship with God. And so it's like a third option. But what I worry about is a lot of people who are anti-Christianity, they see Christianity as that more that religious, earn your way. I need to go to church enough. What do I need to wear to church? How do I need to act? I can't say these words. I can't do this. But that's a caricature of Christianity that is unhelpful. Go ahead. What were you going to say?
I was just going to say that's kind of what I was trying to ask. My word choice might not have been great, but yeah, I just think that sometimes there's some confusion with that type of thing. And I know you have mentioned that to us before, which I find very helpful. And like when I get the opportunities to have conversations with non-believers, I try to tell them there is no amount of Bible reading or church going or that type of thing that's going to earn your way into heaven. Like you said, they're helpful tools to learn more and become closer with God, but that's not what gets you there ultimately. You just have to accept the free gift of salvation. And that's like kind of the whole idea behind this, taking the first step.
Sorry to interrupt, but I get so excited. The way I've been saying that as of late, Fern, is that there's nothing we can do that makes God's love any bigger or better for us. But doing the things like reading the Bible or being part of a church community or these kinds of things, they just help us to unpack the present and see how great it is. It's like without those actions, like reading through the Bible, what we should get out of that is, wow, God is really awesome and he's holy and he's good and he still loves me. I cannot believe this. This is such great news. We should get that, like we should unpack and see that truth. The truth didn't change. It was always the same truth. The practice of reading the Bible or prayer or whatever spiritual discipline practice you want to talk about, they should just expand and open up how good the thing has always been. It's not that achieves or makes the thing better for us in particular, that kind of deal.
And there's one more thing I just think that we should talk about, because we're trying to approach people who may not know a whole lot of things. And I think we should talk about the free will idea. Just because I know, a lot of people want to know, what is God's plan here? Why is why do all these bad things happen in the world? And I know you and I have talked about it before, but I just think it's a very, very common question.
Yeah.
And even as a Christian, I ask myself sometimes, like, why that? You know?
Yeah.
And it doesn't always make sense. So what do you have to say about that idea?
Let me make sure I have the question right. So the question is, like, is it more on the lines of why can bad things happen? Like, why does God allow suffering? Or is it more along the lines of, are we robots and God controls everything, or do we have free choice in the world?
I think more along the lines of, why the suffering.
Yeah, let me try to briefly answer both, and then my guess is we could unpack this more some other time.
Probably.
So about free will, one simple way to think about that is, a lot of people say, well, why didn't God just make us to not ever rebel or not ever sin or not ever cause all the catastrophe in the world that has come from human rebellion? I mean, when you think deeply about this and you get to the saddest and most difficult things in the world, I mean, it gets really, really, really low. And so there's some very honest questions, and people who have suffered deeply because of things. And so I don't want to sugarcoat it. But one of the Christian responses to that is that, two quick responses. One is, if there is no God, you're actually left with worse suffering, because now the suffering has no meaning whatsoever. It's just, survival of the fittest, so, some tragic thing happened to you. There's nothing deeper than that. You just have to live with the fact that that's just how life is. And so that's, in my mind, not all of that. There's no hope for redemption, is one way to say it. The second thing about suffering is that without the option to choose unhealthy actions, we don't have the option to choose healthy actions. We're just robots. And God could have created a robotic world. However, it's like, what precisely is compelling? Like, we love a romance movie because it's like the person chooses, despite whatever, to love the other person. We love somebody adopting an orphan kid because the person's choosing, at great sacrifice to themselves, to adopt. And the idea of the Bible is that ultimately all of those things get wrapped up into God's choosing to send Jesus to adopt us into his family despite our penchant towards rebellion. And so all of that stuff relates to the suffering, the suffering question. And then as it relates to and I guess also the free will question, they're kind of connected together, but there's a lot more that can be said. There's a lot of great biblical passages. For example, the book of Job, really helpful description of some of that kind of stuff to think through. And of course, Christ, who suffered, the God that we serve, that Fern and I serve at least, is like, he's not a God who stands apart from our suffering. He's a God that entered into and suffered himself for our good, which is better than in my mind, better than an Islam, which says, that's just human stuff and I'll be up here in perfection kind of thing.
Right.
So
I thought that was very insightful, and I just want to thank you for all the points that you brought up. There was a few things that I just wanted to say that I would want people to know if they're exploring Christianity or a relationship with God. And that's and you touched on a lot of this stuff, but there's nothing that you can do to make God stop loving you. He hates your sin, but he still loves the sinner. And I think a lot of people think that they need to make changes in their life before they can call themselves a follower of Christ or whatever, but that's not true. You can only make those changes with God's help. Correct. So you that's just great. Need to go to God exactly how you are. And we talked about this too, but you can't earn your way into heaven. Jesus has already paid your debt. So all you have to do is make the first step and accept that free gift of salvation. I've
always encouraged people to read the Bible yourself. I mean, there's nothing, I think everybody who is a Christian, everybody who is exploring Christianity, it's as you brought to me earlier, Fern, it's the most popular book in the history of the universe. Most bought, most read, this kind of thing. But I think a lot of Christians nowadays, but also people who are exploring, it's like, read it for yourself and make an authentic decision. If you want to read the Bible, I always suggest people to start with the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Specifically start with Mark and read through those and just think, what about this person Jesus? Read and think critically about Jesus and see where that takes you.
If anybody does have any questions or more comments or suggestions on any future topics, they can reach out to me or Luke, or just leave a comment on our YouTube video that we'll have posted. Thank you, Luke, for your time.
Yeah, thanks, Fern.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet.